Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us today to stay curious. You see Gary Allgire, structural engineer for Apollo and the shuttle spacecraft, sitting beside me. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Mark. How you doing?
Always great to have you on board and hear you doing your docent thing here at the American Space Museum. Gary, you're going to help me today look at the late Tom Stafford, who died yesterday at age 93. We're going to look at his four missions. Each of them, you could say, had death knocking at their door.
Wow.
And we talked about it. It's true, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very much so. Yes.
He definitely had four missions that were far from nominal,
Yeah.
and that I think tests a lot to the character of this great astronaut. And
Yes.
so we're going to look at that a little
Okay.
bit there. And you had a personal within 10 feet of the guy several times,
Yeah,
right?
less than that. Yes. Yeah. Shook his hand and talked to him for just a few seconds, but when I gave him a tour to the cosmonauts, yes.
Was that during the Apollo-Soyuz test project,
it
correct?
was,
All
yes.
right. Well, we're going to enjoy Gary and I just talking about the Gemini 6 mission of Gemini 6, Gemini 9, Apollo 10, and the Apollo-Soyuz test project. And if you don't know your space history, we're going to catch up on some here because each one of them had a complete drama that one of them didn't affect Cernan's life. Stafford's life, but it did his Apollo 9 mate, Gene Cernan. But let's look at the tribute to this great astronaut as things still pouring in all over the world for this great man behind the scenes, general of the Air Force. He, three-star general, so there 3 stars there. He had a lot to do with the Russian and American cooperation at the International Space Station till the very end. Was on a committee there, and as the commander at Edwards Air Force Base, he was over Area 51,
Yeah.
all those secrets, as well as developing these stealth bombers. In fact, Lieutenant General Tom Stafford is known as the father of the stealth.
Oh my.
To those of you that didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but just he's so far, he's behind the scenes, it's incredible. This is a following statement from NASA Administrator Bill Nelson on Monday's passing of Thomas Stafford, a lifelong space exploration advocate. Quote, "Today, General Stafford went to the eternal heavens, which he so courageously explored as a Gemini and Apollo astronaut, and as well as a peacemaker in the Apollo-Soyuz mission. Those of us privileged to know him are very sad, but grateful we knew a giant. Tom was critical to the earliest successes of our nation's space program and was instrumental in developing space as a model for international cooperation. He also helped us learn from tragedies and grow and reach for the next generation of achievement. He was intimately involved with the space program, sharing his thoughts and suggestions on NASA missions until the end of his life." This is from Bill Nelson, our NASA administrator. Quote, "Tom was a gentleman and a daredevil. He flew our first rendezvous in space in Gemini 6 and piloted Gemini 9's path to Earth with pencil and paper when the spacecraft's guidance system computer failed in orbit. He commanded Apollo 10, the first flight of the lunar module to the moon, a critical test flight that resulted in the successful landing on the moon during Apollo 11 mission. Tom also flew more than 100 different types of aircraft throughout his career as he pushed the edge of the envelope of our achievement in air and space. He was an extraordinary peacemaker who commanded NASA's first rendezvous of an international spacecraft on the Apollo-Soyuz mission. His counterpart, General Alexei Leonov, became a best friend over the years. Tom gave Alexei's eulogy in 2019 at the Russian state funeral." Still from Bill Nelson, our NASA administrator, "Tom's dedication to NASA never wavered. In later years, he chaired a team to independently advise NASA how to carry out President H.W. Bush's space policy and completed the study America at the Threshold about the nation's potential future with humans in space. He was also co-chairman of the Stafford Covey Space Shuttle Return to Flight Task Group that assessed NASA's implementation of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board Space Shuttle Return to Flight recommendations." Quote, "Our nation will be forever grateful to an explorer who never lost his sense of wonder, about his time in space. He said, quote, "It changes you for sure, changes your outlook. As you look back, you see a little blue and white baseball. Actually, it's smaller than a baseball, but it's hard to envision that is where all the people you've known all your life are, where you went to school, your friends, your family. It's hard to envision that there are 3 billion people on that blue and white baseball." Godspeed, Tom Stafford, said Bill Nelson. And there's the beautiful ball rising above the earth there on the Apollo 10. John Glenn also said about Tom Stafford that his, to paraphrase, his contribution to the defense of our country is unparalleled to hardly anybody that has been involved with that. Again, the father of the stealth bomber and fighters and all that he's considered. So we're going to look at his life here. Where'd my cheat sheet go? I had it taped right there.
I'll see it right here.
Okay, I got my picture. Oh, here, Marty. Let me go back here. I said it. That's yesterday. I'm looking for my.
It's not over there, is it?
Oh, Marty's got it there for me. Thank you, buddy. All right. All right. And welcome to Marty Winkle, who's here with, we're going to talk, before we talk about the missions of Gemini 6, where the launch abort in December 65 with Wally Schirra cheated death. Gemini 9, the angry alligator, once they got up there, the docking probe, the docking system. Yep, it had they weren't able to dock with it because the cover didn't come off. And during that spacewalk that Gene Cernan took, he came close to passing out, at least from overexertion, and Tom had to pull him in by the rope, so to speak, by the air hose. Apollo 10, a radar mistake, had the ascent stage thinking it was going down instead of up. A bucking bronco ensued. Within 10 seconds, they could have crashed into the moon. And then Apollo-Soyuz test project had the drama of the landing of the spacecraft, had hydrazine chemicals bleeding into a vent accidentally, and it knocked out Vance Brand, and Stafford and Deke Slayton were conscious, but all 3 had to spend 2 weeks in the hospital to get over those hydrazine burns. Or whatever the toxic chemical is, we'll talk about there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, Gary, we're going to visit to Spaceview Park and the Hall of Fame here project that NASA, that the American Space Museum's U.S. Space Walk of Fame Foundation created back in the 90s. Project Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo were major $1 million projects of this museum in the 2000 era up there. And this is how the park looks like the Gemini gallery today. Gallery, I call it. Those pylons are shaped like a 2, just like the Gemini symbol at the end. You have astronaut handprints in bronze on each pylon. All of the Gemini astronauts are there, and pavers are in the ground of each of the missions. And there's Tom Stafford. This was dedicated in 1996, so it was about 97 when he was out there in front of the marble wall that has space workers on it. There's Charlie Mars, our godfather. Charlie was in the museum today, in fact. And he remembers that this day when I showed it to him, he said Tom had that cell phone in his head the whole time there. People constantly calling him up. There's Charlie Mars, was a project manager of Vandenberg, also Space Station Freedom. In the Apollo era, he was the liaison NASA manager between the Grumman lunar module and the astronauts that were going to board it. So there's the paver for Gemini 9, Gemini 6 actually there in the ground. I was remiss and didn't pull up their handprints there. Great tribute out there, isn't it, Gary?
It's quite, fantastic, really.
Only place in the world. There's Tom looking at his handprints in bronze there, and how he signed it and all. There's Karen Conklin in our background there. She's hating me pointing that out, but she's been around our museum for almost the whole duration since it morphed into museums. And there's a great shot of the general with a 1997 flip phone up to his head there, and just a great day. Many astronauts have helped us. Tom has helped us to, even last year, he offered something from the Apollo-Soyuz test project, a crew-signed piece of beta cloth that we put up in an auction, and I think it went for several $1,000s. So here's the symbol for the GTA-6 Gemini Titan Agena rocket, is what GTA stands for. The Agena was the docking. You know some of this history, so please chime in there, Gary.
Okay.
Of course, Mercury astronaut Wally Schirra riding his second flight there with Tom, always known to be having a receding hairline
Yes,
there
he did.
back in the day, being outfitted in the White Room. And when they blasted off on I have to look up that date, and I'm not going to I'm going to talk in generalities. So you space geeks out there, I'll probably say a few wrong things. I'm asking forgiveness from the start. But early December, they got down to T0, it fired, and it shut off.
That's right.
What stories did you hear about that, Gary?
Well, I heard that they were going to, one of the astronauts was going to use the ejection seat to get out. And I was always told it was Tom Stafford reached across to Wally Schirra and says, don't do it. And the reason they didn't want to do it, because Tom Stafford has always said, if we do use the ejection seats at the pad, you will see 2 Roman candles come out of the capsule.
And there's a logical reason why.
Yes. And that was because they're sitting in pure oxygen for hours, and oxygen does absorb into your clothing. So when the rocket engine that's underneath their seat fires, it would ignite their suits, and they would go out as flaming candles. And so they never wanted to use that.
That makes perfect sense to me. I also heard the story that the experienced astronaut Wally Schirra said he didn't feel any. I've read this in his book. That he said he didn't feel anything in his rear end, which he didn't use that word, but I didn't feel anything in my rear end, like in Mercury, of us moving. So I didn't think that we had lifted off, and they were dubious about that whole system themselves, and they didn't feel themselves tipping. The gyro in there wasn't doing any maneuvering around, so they waited it out. Not sure what the anomaly was. I don't want to.
I don't know, but I also understood it had lifted just a fraction of an inch and set back down. It didn't pull off any of the connectors, and so they were safe.
So they got them out safe, but then and here is an interesting artifact of the American Space Museum we're very proud of, given to us by Bob Seek, launch director of shuttles, not of a Mercury or a Gemini. But this is the respiratory rate and heartbeat of Tom Stafford, who signed his up there, and Wally Schirra. And as you rolled it out there at this T-0 in this incident, what was shown there?
Not much, really. It didn't have any much fluctuations in the chart.
They weren't scared.
Yes.
They were more mad that they weren't going. It was more like, doggone it, we wish we'd, what's going on? Let's go. We're ready to go. It's like sitting on a roller coaster ride, and the latches don't go off, and you're hanging there going, wait a minute, I'm ready to do this. But they were not fearful at all. It doesn't show that they were freaking out or anything
characters
in there. So we love that that's a one-of-a-kind artifact. And, of course, they were launched several weeks later. They launched up Gemini 7 first with Jim Lovell, who's 94, the oldest living astronaut, and Frank Borman, who spent 2 weeks in a can, so to speak. And so they went up there for a quick rendezvous without docking, of course, to test that technique and everything. Really an important mission, and got within feet of each other and took these historic photos.
You got to hand it to the launch team to turn those vehicles around and able to launch 6A in time to be rendezvous with 10. that was actually remarkable for the time. Really was.
Yes, and probably not as elaborate of crews as they have today to do things. I
That's
mean,
right.
everybody's still feeling their way in the infancy of the Gemini
That's
program.
correct. Yeah.
10 Gemini missions in the 1965 and 66, almost every 6 weeks. It was an incredible time to be a teenager that I was in watching these astronauts, our heroes, go up so frequently
That's right.
and accomplish so much. But in 65 and 66, you didn't know some of the dangers that they fought out. You didn't know how close they came to that abort on the pad
That's true.
and so forth. Well, then we go to Tom Stafford's. There's the beautiful landing of Gemini 6. They were only up there for less than a day. It was a quick up and down rendezvous and didn't have much other plans to do that. Very focused. And if you knew Wally Schirra or heard the stories that Nick Thomas, the astronaut ringer at Kennedy Space Center, says, he was a very focused person, checklist type of guy, didn't want to go outside the boxes, wanted to accomplish the goals that were set in front of him as perfectly as he did. And of course, how much perfect could you get with the Apollo 7 10-day mission that put us back on track to the moon? Have any doings with the?
No. I was still. Well, Apollo 7 I did, but this is back when I was still in school, in high school. Now, I don't think it's ever been mentioned. You'll notice that the Gemini spacecraft sits horizontal in the water compared to Mercury, Apollo, Artemis, or the Dragon. They all are sitting vertically.
Yeah, good point there,
and
Gary.
The reason it was done this way is originally they were going to fly with the Regalo wing, and they were going to land horizontally in the desert. And based on that, that's one that needed ejection seats in case the wing didn't deploy, that they could eject when they were flying horizontal down on the wing. But the wing was too complicated, and the gear was too complicated to put all that into that capsule. So they did away with it, but they still kept the idea of landing horizontally in the water. And when they're on that chute coming down, as before they approach the water, there is a piece of ordnance that fires that takes it from the vertical and drops it horizontally.
Huh.
And it's quite abrupt. The first time they did that, the crew was very shocked. They forgot about it and didn't realize that was going to happen. So they landed horizontally in the water.
Very interesting. There's a great tip from Gary Allgire, something I hadn't considered. Thank you, Gary. Well, we move on to his second mission. Now, Stafford was on 4 different spaceships. Think about that a minute, okay? As Mercury's number 1, and then, the Gemini, is number 1, and then he flew another Gemini mission that was fraught, because of death, is the reason why he took this mission. The prime crew of Dick Elliott C. and Richard Bassett were killed in front of their eyes, basically, their eyes being the backup crew of Stafford and Gene Cernan, as C. and Bassett's T-38s landed at St. Louis at the McDonnell airstrip where their spacecrafts were being built. It was a bad weather situation. They clipped the building, actually.
Yeah, they fly together in a formation, and they were making a circular approach instead of landing like normal aircraft where you do a long approach and land on the runway. The military loved doing this. They would come in and they would fly a circle like the shuttle did today and land. And as they were coming in, the weather got very, ceiling dropped on them. It was snowing. And Stafford made the announcement, I'm going to go abort this landing and I'm going to turn around and I'll come back on another approach. And as he was flying around, Elliott C. decided to continue that approach, and unfortunately he clipped the building that his spacecraft is, and they both perished. Now, Tom Stafford didn't realize what had happened until he landed and got out of his T-38.
Oh my gosh, with Gene Cernan in the back. They were tandem seats back there. We've actually talked to people that were in the building and heard all of that.
My dad
Horrible.
worked in that building.
Is that right?
Yeah, he worked in that building.
What did he say about
He
it?
didn't say anything. I don't know if it was if he was there that day or working a different shift, but he worked in that building. And he was a machinist, and he actually built parts for the Mercury and Gemini spacecraft.
We'll have to talk about that some other day. You
Yeah.
never mentioned that, Gary.
Yeah.
Horrible tragedy. The astronauts were killed instantly, and 6 months later, Tom Stafford is back up in space, the shortest span of any of the astronauts ever, I think. There might be a shuttle one that flew quickly there at the end of the program, I'm thinking. But so the launch of the GT9 with his crewmate, Gene Cernan, who become his best friend through life, along with Alexei Leonov, was a beautiful launch. They put an augmented docking machine up ahead of them that wasn't in the Gina rocket, but some sort of.
Well, what they did is they didn't have another Gina rocket to fly. So what they did is they had a spare docking system that was going to be on the end of a Gina rocket, and they quickly put it on an Atlas. Now they did hurry up, and part of the hurrying up, they missed a step that released this one strap that held the nose cone on. And what happened is when they got up there, they found out that it had not released, and they couldn't dock with it. So that was a busted as far as the
Interesting. As Trekkie Techie sticks her head in here. Yes, grab this. And there's a mouse there for you that I think that's hooked
this
up.
One?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's hooked up. You okay?
Yeah. I might come back and steal your phone again.
Okay. All right.
How's it going?
She's hooking up our laptop for we can do remote things. So thank you, Jessica Galloway there. So they approached up there and they called this the Angry Alligator.
Right.
So their plans were messed up for the docking, but Gene Cernan was going to do an important spacewalk, actually go around behind the service module part of the Gemini spacecraft and put on a Buck Rogers backpack type of thing to check out. Yeah. But that went awry.
It sure did. Now, back in the early parts of the Gemini, the astronauts trained for zero-G by hanging from slings and moving around. And they were never successful, really, to overcome that because their body in space in zero-G doesn't work the way it does here on Earth. And so they had a very difficult time. They didn't have handholds to get back to the backside of the Gemini spacecraft. And all they had was this air hose. And of course, we had the famous thing where he got overheated.
Mm-hmm.
His faceplate fogged over. He couldn't see. And his heart rate started increasing, and he was very, very hot. And they pulled him back just in time otherwise he would have perished.
And that's true. Drama played out at Kennedy Space Center Visitors Complex in the Astronaut Hall of Fame. They superimpose a movie over the Gemini 9 spacecraft that's out there. And Cernan talked about it many times. His faceplate, he did overfogged. He was having not exactly hallucinations, but he was having some medical issues. And I think they said that when he landed, there was water in his space suit down to his feet up to his knees from the sweat that had poured in. Has to go somewhere, so it goes down to your shoes when you get in gravity.
And they also didn't have them have water tubes in their undergarments like they did later on to cool them down. And kind of another side note, because of what happened to Elliot C. and Charlie Bassett, is it took Buzz Aldrin out of the certain rotation, and because of that, he actually ended up flying Apollo 11 because of that accident.
12.
Huh?
Aldrin was on 12.
I mean, Buzz Aldrin.
Apollo 11 because Apollo. Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
That put him in rotation for the last Gemini, and then that put him in rotation to be on Apollo 11.
And Buzz Aldrin had the idea. Other ones did too, probably. But let's practice EVAs in the water tank, like a scuba diver, and that helped him out a lot.
Yes.
But Tom Stafford, there's a story that I don't think's urban legend, where Deke Slayton, chief of the astronaut office, when they were going out for liftoff to pad 19, told Stafford, if you have to cut him loose and come back alone. That's a possibility that this might not work out. And an astronaut had to think about returning to Earth without one of their colleagues.
A very tough call.
That would be a very tough call.
I wouldn't want to be in that position at all.
No, I don't. I think you'd even want to bring the astronaut back deceased and not let him orbit the Earth type of thing.
True.
But these are scenarios that we're grateful never had to be played out. But we were within moments of Stafford pulling, Cernan being passed out. Stafford had to pull him in with this to the foresight in that having handholds, other
didn't
little.
have-
You
yeah.
just can't imagine that in today's world that they
Yeah.
wouldn't think that through.
They didn't
but-
think it through because there was no handholds at all.
and there was no precedence of this.
Yeah.
And we weren't communicating with the Russians about how difficult spacewalks were with Alexei Leonov. So Gemini 10, cheating death. I mean 9, pardon me. Gemini 9, cheating death again at the doors. It knocks on this spacecraft. Now, the next flight of Stafford, was, of course, Apollo 10 with lunar module number 4 shown there ascending off of the, not really off the moon, but out of moon orbit. This was to do the dress rehearsal, except landing. The final steps were done by Apollo 11, but they needed to learn how to go down US-1, they called it, the runway down to the Tranquility Base, it became known as, the chosen landing site. And we'll talk about what happened there that cheated death, but a beautiful collage montage by Chris Calley celebrating the launch with the 3 astronauts in their Earthrise portrait. Thank you, Chris, for what you do for the American Space Museum, and a gag photo. Okay. This is kind of passed by the wayside. There was those that collected knickknacks. A lot of homes had 3 monkeys. Hear no evil, or speak no evil, see no evil, hear no evil.
That's right.
You don't see that much anywhere, but that would kind of be a catchy thing that you'd see in
You
places.
see that every mission, these guys, even through a shuttle, would have some type of a picture made that was a fun thing to do. It's not for the general public
Yeah.
to see at the time. And this was one of them, but I've seen some other ones that, one of them I know I can't tell anybody about because it's one of the DoD missions.
Uh-huh.
And that was my first one that I actually saw, and I was quite shocked at what I saw. It wasn't nothing that was derogatory or not something that was pornographic or anything like that. None of that stuff. But just the way they were dressed was quite outstanding.
Huh. A DoD mission. I'll
Yeah.
pry it out of him
Yeah,
eventually
it
there.
was-
We'll talk. Gary, you come back. You're going to be leaving to go up to Georgia here in a month or so, right?
That's correct.
We're going to put a DoD mission together. I want to look at those 10 DoD missions, and he'll be giving me a lot of no comment. But a lot of these missions are revealed what they were. But Gary says I can't. You signed the paperwork that you can't talk about it.
I can't deny or say anything about it.
All right.
Okay.
Hear no evil, or speak no evil,
See
see
no
no evil, hear no
no
evil is the pantomime that these astronauts are doing. And just love an opportunity to show a gorgeous rocket launch of a Saturn V rocket. Man, this is like it's 10 miles downrange or something. Just the flame pattern of those F1 engines is something in itself.
The shock waves often was very, very impressive. Artemis may have come close to it or may exceed it a little bit, but the shuttle never came close to the shock waves and the sound that came off of the Saturn V. Very, very impressive.
And I say this many times at public events, Chamber of Commerce, Rotary clubs, that sort of thing. Our great country, every county in our great country probably has arrowheads from the Native Americans that live there, okay? And there's only one place in the world, one county in the world that you can get a brick thrown out of a flame trench of a rocket moonport, and that is Brevard County.
That's right.
And so this is one of 1,244 bricks that blew out of the flame trench on Apollo 10 on May 18th, 1969. And I have seen half a brick of Apollo 11 go for $1,000 at our auctions. So just one of those little minutia things that we have in our museum that we love sharing. So there's 2 awesome things tied with Tom Stafford that we have in our museum here. And there, of course, is Snoopy after it came up from being a simulated launch off of its descent stage. And tell us what happened. that almost endangered the lives of Tom Stafford.
Well, you know more
and
about
Chief
Nigel. You
Cernan.
can explain a little bit better. I didn't work this particular mission, so I'm gonna let you.
Well, he went
do it.
within 9 miles of the moon, going down the exact path that they wanted the next landing to take. And so when they got to the point where we're going to separate the descent stage from the ascent stage after testing the descent stage as it lowered them down to 9 miles, accidentally, there's 2 radars. One radar is for the ascent up to the command module called Charlie Brown, and the other was the descent down to the moon. And so once a switch was properly in the wrong place,
Okay.
that was to switch the ascent from the descent. And though the Snoopy didn't have a descent stage, so to speak, there was a confusion where it was, and it did some turns. They figured in about it flipped over once a second,
Okay.
2 or 3 times. Like I said, you space geeks out there might be correcting me, and that's fine. But they were in serious trouble for at least 5 to 10 seconds. And if it hadn't stabilized itself, and Cernan and Stafford particularly taken quick action, they could have crashed into the moon.
That's right. Yes.
And so within 10 seconds of crashing on the moon, third time that the Grim Reaper is knocking on the door of a spaceship. Now, those are the 4, that is 3 spacecraft that he was in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Gemini, the Apollo command module, and the lunar module. Go
Yeah.
ahead, Gary.
The scuttlebutt in the hallways and the offices, discussion about when they were going to go to the moon on 10 is whether the crew itself would pull some rank and actually land on the moon before Apollo 11. And that was what we talked about a lot, whether he would do that or not
Really?
do that. And the answer always came back from what I understand, and Marty, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the lunar module was too heavy to come back up off of the moon. It didn't have. They've also heard it didn't have enough fuel, purposely to keep them from actually trying to land on the moon.
Marty,
prior to
would you
11.
have a comment of that on our UCX family microphone?
Yeah, I don't think it was, excuse me, it was too heavy. And I can't believe NASA would not put enough fuel in there. It was a matter that they were military people and they follow orders. And that Stafford was not about to land. And he knew they needed to take small incremental steps to do a landing.
That's probably true, but really we talked about it, and we were told it was too heavy.
I wouldn't know, Marty, why they wouldn't want to fully fuel it, because you would want to
Right,
test
yeah,
that.
that's
That'd be an important, because
Yes.
Marty, again, you know so much more about this, but the balance, right? Both of you guys, the center weight of a spacecraft was very important to how it performed,
right.
correct?
Yeah.
So I would think that they would want the tanks full of fuel.
Well,
Those cheeks on each side, we call them.
actually, when they fire the engine, especially like for the command module, service module, when the main engine fires, it's sensing the center of gravity, and it's always firing its thrust vector. It always goes through the center of gravity. As the fuel load drops down, it will automatically adjust for that center of gravity change. I would assume that the lunar module would do the same thing.
Marty, you had anything else to add?
No, I can't talk.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I don't know the difference in weight between LEM 4 and LEM 5. As far as I know, it's basically the same vehicle.
Okay.
It would have been the same weight.
Well, I think Stafford discussion that you said about Stafford was probably more correct than anything else that we scuttlebutted about in the hallways.
Yeah, Marty, did they have the 5-foot probes, touch probes, landing probes on the LEM? Do you remember?
The only LEM 3 had the landing probe up front.
Yes, correct. But did they put all 4 probes, or all 3 on the 10, even though they knew it wasn't going to land?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So they dressed her up for a landing anyway there. Like we said, this was a very hair-raising event. And in fact, some of you may be commenting, don't know, but it was the first time on an open mic an astronaut cussed. Okay, and Gene Cernan said the GD word.
Yeah.
What the heck happened? Just happened as they were bucking bronco in what Life magazine called barnstorming the moon. But that incident was kind of downplayed. Again, in the 1965 era, you had a hard time finding any information. The weekly U.S.
USA Today or
Well, I'm thinking the Aviation Week.
Aviation
what
Week
was
and
the
Space
Bible
Technology.
of the time, and of course you have well, let's move on to the so Stafford is in Apollo. He's in by golly, he's in more spacecraft than we're giving credit for. Think about that: Gemini, Apollo Command Module, the Lunar Module. That's 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
He flew a command module twice, didn't he? So
Yes.
he
Now
was
I'm
two
thinking
different
here in
missions.
Apollo Soyuz, he
Yeah.
takes the last command module. Of his 4 flights, he was commander of 3 of them. Went up with Vance Brand, who's 91 years old, and Deke Slayton, who passed away. Alexei Leonov, first man to walk in space 59 years ago yesterday, March 18th, 65. Died in as we mentioned, 2019, I believe.
21, wasn't it?
2021. And the other cosmonaut was Kubasov, and he's passed away. Two cosmonauts and 3 astronauts met in space in July 1975. Can't describe how huge this was in the détente, it was called, the softening of the Russian-American relations that President Nixon orchestrated with Brezhnev. What was the buzz on the campus of Kennedy Space Center about shaking hands with Russians in space,
We
Gary?
were looking forward to it. It was an opportunity to bring the 2 countries together, not only in space, but here also on the ground, because we had crews go over to Moscow for some testing, and then they had their people come over when we had the docking module airlock system here. We had some of their technicians, and of course we had the cosmonauts come, and the technicians would spend the night in the Holiday Inn on Cocoa Beach. They would get bussed in every morning to the Space Center, go through the Air Force Station side first, and then over to Kennedy. And we'd have a lot of discussions with them because they would tell us how much they loved America and how they loved to go swimming at night in the ocean. And we kept telling them, you don't want to do that because there are a lot of sharks out there. And at nighttime, they may not recognize you as other than a fish. But they still kept doing it. They never quit doing in the oceans. They were here for maybe a couple of months. One of the big things for them was to grab some of our lapel pins that we get from each mission. They would want to swap one of theirs with one of ours. And we did that for a little while until we realized, these ones that we give them are really pure good metal pins. And what they give us are pot metal or plastic. So it got to the point where we would want 2 to 3 of theirs instead of to give one of ours. So we did that. And we kind of looked at them in the way they dressed a little bit different. But we went to a party with them that one of the engineers had at his house when they were getting ready to go back to Moscow. And we had a lot of conversation with them. They spoke pretty good English, and they were just like any other normal person. I enjoyed getting to know them.
Well, that Holiday Inn is now the Comfort Inn. Yeah. Those of you that know where it's at, near across, kind of close to the Hilton on Cocoa Beach, across the street. Siam Orchid's a good sushi and Asian place to eat that's attached to that, and they have a big tribute to the Gemini or Mercury astronauts, that bought the hotel because they did not want to stay out at Hangar S with the monkeys, chimpanzees in there. Yeah, so Marty, that's the correct story, right? They actually bought the Holiday Inn or financed it somehow so they would have a better place to stay, and there's a big thing that tribute to that. Well, the drama of this Apollo-Soyuz docking didn't happen in space. It happened on the way back from space. And here's Tom Usiak, wonderful photograph that he took in July 1975 of the launch of a Saturn S-1B off of the milk stool, they called it there. So it could reach up to all the connections on the LUT, right? The launch umbilical tower. A phrase that Marty taught me. And here is Leonov and Stafford. Each one of the spacecrafts took up half of a couple things that they would put together in space, and then probably flipped a coin to who's going to bring it back whole on there. So, but when
Lexia is sitting in the commander's seat too, so Tom let him go in his seat, so that was pretty nice.
Yes. So Stafford got to sit in a Soyuz spacecraft, the first American to do that, and that become his fourth spacecraft that he was inside of in outer space. The docking system itself that Gary's going to show us some close-ups of could be considered a vehicle in its own right in some ways.
Yeah, because it was self-contained and had this, it could convert over, as an airlock from the 14.7 two gas systems that the Russians used and to our system, which was pure oxygen at 5 psi.
Well, I'll show the handshake in space that we have autographed by everybody, but we didn't get, never got Deke Slayton to autograph this in our museum. Another artifact that we have here, proudly displaying in our one-of-a-kind museum. So when they landed, I'm going to give you the account.
Deke Slayton, this was, he never got to fly in Mercury or Apollo. This was his first actual space mission, was the Apollo-Soyuz project.
But he was so important as the chief of the astronauts.
Yes.
He chose the astronauts. He wielded great power.
Yes, he did.
Unilaterally of choosing the crews and so forth. But here's the drama that happened. The mission was considered a success both technically and public relations for both nations. The only serious problem was the re-entry and splashdown of the Apollo spacecraft, during which the crew were accidentally exposed to toxic monolethyl hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide. And that was the two hypergolic fuels that when they touched, they exploded in the reaction control system. And the RCS was inadvertently left on during the descent, and toxic fumes were sucked into the spacecraft as it drew in outside air. All right. Brandt briefly lost consciousness while Stafford retrieved emergency oxygen masks, put one on Brandt, and gave one to Slayton. The three astronauts were hospitalized for 2 weeks in Honolulu, Hawaii, from burns in their lungs from that breathing in those vapors. Now, Tom Stafford, and when you look at his wonderful presentations, and I'm sure a bunch of them are on YouTube, was a very animated man talking about things. And I've heard him talk several times about this on a YouTube thing where he said that when they were upside down, the Apollo, the flipped over, the balloons that were erecting it hadn't inflated yet, and he said he was hanging from the straps, and he had and Brandt was out, and he was worried. He wasn't so sure about Slayton that was on the other side, and he punched the safety belt harness that had to get to the back gas mask. He said, "We're down in the corner of the spacecraft, which had been up by the conical part," and he grabbed the brass nut, put it on Brandt, who was passed out.
Yeah.
And then again, they spent 2 weeks in a hospital. So this had to be pretty serious.
It was, and they're very lucky to survive that because this stuff is very nasty.
The fourth time, and that was that death had knocked at the door of a spacecraft that Slayton was in.
Okay.
Just a incredible little to think about that.
Yes.
Again, there's so many what ifs of the space program. There's 4 instances there involving the great Tom Stafford and his less than nominal space flights to space. Well, Gary, let's look at what you brought to share personally here with us here. Marty, we got any questions or comments? Were that boring? Gee, okay. People are watching us, huh? He's got no comment on whether we're boring or not.
Yeah, okay.
No, definitely not boring.
Okay.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gary, Gerald, Tom Usiak, Bill Whiting, Doug Forrest, Steve Yoakum, and Dave Stange enjoying this program here. And they'll tell their friends to watch it because we got Gary on here. Gary Allgire, you brought a couple personal pictures here. There's what the configuration
This is a simulated picture of what the docking together looked like. In between the command module on the left and the Soyuz spacecraft on the right. That black object that you see in the middle covers over the top 2 nitrogen tanks that provide so we could transfer from the Soyuz into the command module and vice versa and back into the Soyuz. It also contained a docking system that was unique for this particular mission so that the two countries could dock together, because we used a completely different system than what they used in Russia. So they got together once they signed the agreement that they were going to do this, they got together and they came up with a united way to do it. And that system that they picked then is still used today. It's been kind of put into an international agreement that anybody wants to dock in space, you will use this particular system. So any country can, if they wanted to dock with the space station, they could pick up that document, design their docking system to match what's on the space station.
Does it have a name like the Allgire
No,
system?
it didn't have a name. It's been highly modified since the Apollo program. We were kind of more crude than the Russians were. They used electronics to open and close their latches and to absorb the impact of the two coming together, where we used the old shock absorbers and we used cables to operate the latches through motors.
This is a big deal. You've got space vehicles that weigh tons, okay, and there's in space that we say weightless in microgravity, but the mass is still there to push things around.
Now, originally, the Russians wanted to be the primary vehicle where they would dock with us. And after they got together and discussed the performance issues of the two spacecraft, we realized their spacecraft did not have enough thruster capability to actually do that. So we shifted over to where we were the prime crew. That actually we did the docking with them.
How did the docking collar get up there?
It came in. It was mounted on a separate device inside the slaw where the lunar module would have been.
Okay.
Okay. It sat in a cradle, and then when they got into orbit, they separated from the slaw, blew the panels off, and then they would go in and they would dock with it, and then they would fire 3 latches, ordnance-wise, and release it, and they would pull back out, and then they would go turn around and they would rendezvous with the Russians.
And you have a story about that.
I have a story about
that
yes.
Is very interesting.
Yes.
Maybe a little sabotage happening.
It could have
Some
been.
disgruntled space workers. We'll
It could have been.
look at that in a second here. Here's a couple personal pictures of Gary.
Okay,
Brought me in.
this is in the altitude chamber. Like we said, we did all these docking tests with all the Apollo spacecraft, the lunar modules, and now we had to do it with the docking system. What you're seeing on the top of this is the actual system that will dock with the Russians. We have 3 pedals that's sticking outboard
At the very top.
at the very top, and the Russians would have 3 pedals that would interlock when we got them together. There's a called soft docking and hard docking. Soft docking was we released a little ring. In that ring was some capture latches, and once it engages the pedal of the Soyuz side, it would lock them, and then they would retract until we had another set of latches that actually physically tied the 2 vehicles together.
Well, very interesting. Marty, we do have a question.
Yeah, we have a question from Dave Stangy. Gary, can you elaborate on the docking problems they had during the mission? He says, if I remember correctly, I thought that Slayton came in hot and caused quite a hard docking.
Oh, I don't know. I never remember hearing about that, but that doesn't make sense because they send this ring out first, and it has these shock absorbers that will cushion and take out any motions that are developed from docking. But if he did it hard, then they would have never had that system would have absorbed it, and they would have never really felt that. Now maybe he retracted the ring too fast. I don't know how he could do that, but he may have, and that would cause a hard impact.
Thank you for your question there, Dave, and you're following us, of course, faithfully like you do. Right here's another personal photograph there.
Yeah, this is we're doing the docking test. This is down lower in the chamber. Sitting down is Deke Slayton, and standing up in front of him is Vance Brand. and they participated in this docking test. Now, Tom Stafford did not show up for this test, from what I remember. And I'm up in the left-hand corner
That's
there.
you sitting down up
Yeah.
there on the left.
Which is unusual.
Taking a break,
Yeah,
Gary.
well, I wasn't taking a break. I was just waiting for them to get finished with that so we could continue on. We had to wear hard hats while we were lowering it. Once we stopped lowering it, then we could take the hard hats off. On the gentleman on the right,
So that's the flight hardware.
that is the flight hardware. That's the actual hardware that we docked with. Like I said, Tom Stafford wasn't not there. And what was unusual is normally I do this with my counterpart, my Rockwell counterpart, which was Mike Wiedemann. And he has been called to California for some management training. So he asked if I would do it myself because we had a really small crew at that time. Everybody in our office except for me, and the same thing for Mike, they'd all started working on the space shuttle, on the advanced planning for the space shuttle. So I was the only one left in our office.
Of course, 1975, this is July. The space shuttle had just been okayed by the Nixon administration in 1972.
That's right.
So, that's one thing I talk about. STS 133, 34, 35 were some of the cleanest missions ever. No disgruntled workers trying to throw a monkey wrench into things because they just lost a second. But I love this next picture.
Okay, this is, I had the honor of escorting the astronauts and the cosmonauts to give them a tour and explain the docking system and the airlock to them. Of course, they knew everything anyway, but they had the honor to do that. Next to me is Alexia.
Marty, Gary, Gary's in the dark, he's the only one in the black or dark.
It's green. It's dark green.
Up there at the top.
With my badge. I'm getting ready to point out something, so I have my hand in front of my face. I didn't know they were taking this picture. And behind me, to the left in this picture, that's the interpreter, this female interpreter they had. Then Alexia, and then right below him is the other gentleman that they flew, Kubasov. And then to his closest to the tank that you see, that's Vance Brand.
With the sideburns there.
Yeah, sideburns. And there's Tom Stafford with his hand up to his side, pointing at something. And right behind him is Deke Slayton.
Yeah. Now, it looks like he's got a cell phone in his hand, but he's not. He's scratching his face, apparently. He didn't have cell phones in 1975, but that'd be the first thing that you'd think about there.
Actually, I mislabeled one of the guys. The other Russian is very, very in the back looking out. Deke Slayton is just right behind Tom Stafford. So I did give them a chance to walk around and show them everything and explain stuff to them. And they understood English very, very well. We never did really use the interpreter, but they had one there just in case.
Marty gave me a note here. Appreciate it. Why wasn't Slayton the commander?
That was his first flight. He was a rookie.
Yeah, he was a rookie.
Yeah. So
is that what you're looking at, Marty? And what did I say to remind me of? Did I mention that?
Yeah, LEM 4 orbiting the.
Yeah, thank you, Marty, for remembering that. LEM 4 is actually still orbiting the sun. When it undocked in lunar orbit, it did not crash into the surface like they wanted to do, and don't know why. But it's and it's actually going to come by the Earth in 5 or 6 years or something.
It's trailing the Earth in higher orbit than the Earth, and it's technically feasible to go. Well, it's technically they say they could maybe go retrieve it. There's absolutely no way to put it in something because there's no attach points. But the reason why it went into that sun's synchronization orbit, you realize when these two are docked, the tunnel between the two vehicles, there's hatches on either side. That volume in there is pressurized. And so when they fired the ring off, they have a piece of ordnance. So the docking ring, the probe, stays with the lunar module. That extra little of the air escaping out pushed it a little bit faster than they thought. And that's what caused it to go into this weird orbit around the sun.
And Marty, that's also what caused lunar Apollo 11 to be off by about 2 miles, 2.5 miles. There's extra pressure in there that pushed them a little bit further. They had to figure that out in there.
Yeah, they found them all, but
no. Okay, Marty's saying no.
This is when they discovered it.
I spoke to Charlie Duke about that when when he was down there last time. That's what I thought the problem was, and he said no. He said it was the lumpy gravity that caused the.
Lumpy gravity?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the lumpy gravity, lunar mascons, they're called. Mass concentrations of lava that's in certain areas
Certain
of clumps
areas,
that do that. But well, that's very interesting that Gary's sharing this. He's got one more personal photo with him in it there that says, look at those graphics there.
Yeah.
What sign company did you have make that?
It was the last minute. 'cause
Apollo 17 is what that says there.
a lot of these.
You're in the middle.
We're in the middle, and to the right of me is Mike Wiedemann, who is the contractor engineer that was still working the AST program that I talk about that has had to go to California. And to the left there is Jim Hedges, who is an operations engineer. Normally, they would take pictures of us right before the last time we could be up there around the spacecraft. Since this was Apollo 17, somebody says we need to make sure how we identify these pictures that are out there. And so they grabbed a piece of cardboard, they got some of the tape that we used, and it was red. The reflection off of it, you really can't see Apollo 17. But that's how we know this is Apollo 17. Now, Mike is a special individual as far as I'm concerned. In a way, he's a hero to me.
The guy on the right.
Yeah,
Or
right on
tall
the
guy.
right, Mike Wiedemann. He graduated from the University of Florida, and he hired in about 2 or 3 weeks after I hired into NASA. So we became very good, close friends with him and his family and our family throughout the years that we worked together. For that particular mission, he wasn't there for the docking test, but the morning that they launched, he came by the office and he said, Gary, I had come in, I couldn't sleep, so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I decided to come in. He had access to the last time we had access to the docking system inside the slaw, and I decided to do a last minute check. So he went in there and he was checking for the 3 attach points, and it was a piece of ordnance that would fire the upper half of we released the upper half of that latch. It would fly back. There was a cable that was connected to it that held it in the open position. And so when all 3 were open, then they could go in and dock and move it. When he got up there, he started looking at them, and he noticed one of them was rigged wrong. The cable was not rigged to hold it open. It was rigged to keep it closed. So he called in some technicians, and they redid that. If he had not decided to go in that night, when they got up on orbit and they went to go retrieve the docking system out of the slaw, out of the Saturn V third stage, they would have not been able to retrieve it. That would have aborted the mission right there. Very, very embarrassing. Now, it was never publicly said anything about it. Mike never got any reward from NASA honoring that.
Is that right?
He should have got a Silver Snoopy for that. It was kept quiet. And today I look back and I said, well, it's hard to believe that our technicians screwed up so bad with the 2 quality people that watched that. Was it some form of sabotage? Because all the technicians were going to be laid off after that, unless there was a few that were going to go to the shuttle. So that was a question. It was never an investigation, because time the management found out about it, they had already retrieved it and were on the way to meet the Russians. But Mike was a hero. He passed away here about 2 years before the 50th anniversary of them landing on the moon.
Mike Wiedemann, a real hidden figure of the Apollo Soyuz test project.
Very, very dedicated. It was a pleasure to work with that gentleman.
Just one of the many people whose memories we like keeping fresh and in front of space lovers out there. Like you, Gary. Appreciate you being here today. We enjoyed honoring this man who meant a lot to the American Space Museum in our infancy, building up Spaceview Park, and the services and so forth, I think, are later this week in his hometown of Weatherford, Oklahoma, that he attributed those Midwestern values throughout his life as embracing those, as building his his character, the man he was.
He was. Some of these astronauts didn't turn out as good as they thought they would, but he was one of them that was really an
Absolutely.
outstanding individual.
Gary, thank you for sharing this
Likewise.
program with us here. I knew you'd enlighten it a lot more up there. Thank you all for watching Stay Curious today. Marty, anything to fix up on our Streamlabs board there?
Nope.
All right. I forgot to put the slide up there, but we've got Chachi tomorrow. Mike Cianelli will be in our studio tomorrow. He is the director of the Apollo Challenger Columbia Lessons Learned program of NASA.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to build a bridge to Chachi's, his nickname there. And he's very anxious to see the museum tomorrow, as well as share with us Forever Remembrance tribute out there at the Kennedy Space Center, one of the most gorgeous displays of anything you'll ever want to see as the Columbia and Mercury astronaut, or as the Challenger and Columbia astronauts are celebrated so just fabulously out there with at that display. So he was responsible for that.
Okay.
Mike Cianelli, a good Italian man there. So look forward to that tomorrow. Until that time, I'm Mark Marquette saying thank you for watching. And Gary and I can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us.